Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Right now, I'm going to talk about the aftermath following the terrorist attacks in Paris. In response to those attacks, there's been a reaction. There's been a reaction that's based on fear and hatred and prejudice. So, following these attacks, the people are calling for a halt. They want to prevent Syrian refugees from coming to the United States. You have governors from all over the United States saying that they don't want any Syrian refugees coming to their states. So that's just one reaction, and I want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. The United States helped create the problem in Syria through its failed Middle Eastern foreign policy. First of all, the entire region was destabilized when the United States decided to invade Iraq. It was completely destabilized. There was a vacuum in power, and that's what made it possible for a terrorist group like ISIS to emerge. It made it possible for such a group to seize power, to seize territory, to terrorize Muslims and non-Muslims. The United States created that monster. Much how they created that monster in Afghanistan that would later become Al Qaeda. They trained those terrorists. They taught them how to be terrorists. And then that Frankenstein monster that they created came back to haunt them when the 9/11 terrorist attacks occurred. And what we see in France and what we will probably see in America is a result of that failed foreign policy, a foreign policy that trains terrorists, and those terrorists come back to haunt us. You have a fundamentalist government in Saudi Arabia that's funding a lot of these terrorist groups. Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States, and the United States works with them. And it turns out that a lot of these weapons and training and all that stuff ends up going towards these terrorist groups like ISIS. And you have all these factions, these different countries intervening in the affairs in Syria. You have Turkey, you have Saudi Arabia, you have the Iranians, you have the Russians, you have the Western powers, including the United States, you have France, all these countries in that region of the world using people as pawns in their chess match. And at the end of the day, the people there lose. They have nothing but death and destruction. So they are fleeing that. They're fleeing oppression. They're fleeing tyranny in order to pursue a better life. They're fleeing a problem that the West helped create. And since the West helped create the problem, the West must play some kind of role in addressing that problem. And one way to address it is by opening gateways for refugees to come to the United States. That's only right. That's only just. That's only fair. Now, let me be clear. I'm not stupid. I believe that we need to be careful and monitor who comes into the United States. We need to take all necessary precautions to ensure that terrorists do not come into the United States. But at the same time, you can't collectively punish an entire race of people, an entire ethnic group, based on the actions of a few within that group. You just can't do that. You can't punish an entire religion based on the actions of a few extremists. Much like you can't condemn all white people for the actions of a few white people. No one goes around discriminating against young white men because many young white men commit acts of mass destruction or commit mass killings. The majority of these mass shootings that occur are committed by white young men. But you don't see the police going around harassing all young white men because white men, white people are judged as individuals in this country. You have terrorist groups in America with a long history of terrorism, like the Ku Klux Klan, an organization that purports to be a Christian organization, an organization that burns crosses to terrorize people, an organization that beats people, shoots people, kills people, an organization that's bombed churches and lynched black people. We don't judge all Christians based on the actions of that hate group, and neither should we judge all Muslims based on the actions of ISIS and other terrorist groups, because the majority of Muslims condemn such terrorism. So those are my first couple of points, and I want to deal with two other points. The first one deals with calls to close mosques. You have this Republican candidate, Donald Trump, who has called for a closing of some mosques. First of all, if you consider yourself a patriot, then you clearly believe in the United States Constitution. These people want to pretend like they love this country so much. But if you love this country, you would uphold the supposed or purported values of this country, the values that are embodied in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion. The freedom of religion. So you can't claim to be a patriot and then want to deny people their right to practice religion. You can't claim to be a patriot and at the same time try to deprive people of their basic civil liberties. And that brings me to this other point, and that's about civil liberties. You have all these people talking about the lack of intelligence gathering. They have the people full of fear about the next terrorist attack. And they exploit this fear to erode the people's rights, to erode the people's civil rights and their civil liberties. We already have a problem that's been exposed by a whistleblower, Edward Snowden. He exposed how the NSA gathers massive amounts of information about our telephone calls and our internet activities. Massive information. And the overwhelming majority of the people who they gather information on, the overwhelming majority of them are innocent, law-abiding American citizens. And you have more of these government bureaucrats and military people urging the government to give them even more rights, more power to violate our civil liberties. If we're not careful, we will end up living in a dictatorship, a totalitarian society. We can't allow fear to cause us to surrender our freedom. So those are just a few points that I wanted to talk about. Tell me what you think about these things. And as you reflect upon this stuff, you just have to think about this one point that I read in this book by Angela Davis. And the title of the book is If They Come in the Morning. So it basically goes like this. If they come for me in the morning, they'll come for you later. And there's an example, a famous example of how When the government violated other people's rights, you said nothing. And then eventually that same government ends up violating your rights. So when you hear about these stories, just imagine them saying, well, we're going to close churches, or we're going to close synagogues based on the actions of a few people. Would you think that that's right? Would you think that that is just? You can't collectively punish an entire religion based on the actions of a few. So please tell me what you think about this. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.